Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Stephanie Bree. I know I'm a little gamer-centric this week, but I try to do video game videos every week anyways. Because that's where my interests lie. I just did a video on comparing the Wii U to the GameCube. So some of what I said there is going to carry over here. So go watch that video for a more in-depth analysis for the GameCube, why it was what it was, and why it did what it did. But this video is more of, did DVDs really matter during the PS2 era? There are two schools of camp when it comes, or schools of thought when it comes to this topic. You have those who will argue, yes, the PS2 was a runaway success because it played DVDs. And then you have those who will argue it didn't matter at all because the Xbox also played DVDs and it didn't move the needle, right? It didn't light up the sales charts. Now, I've already done more than one video on everything that went wrong with the GameCube. As much as I love the GameCube, and it is still to this day one of my favorite game consoles of all time, and that's never going to change. It had a lot of issues, and it didn't light up the sales charts either, and it's being rediscovered and being remembered fondly today. It was made fun of back when it was new, and you were made fun of if you had a GameCube. If you went into GameStop and said, "Where's your GameCube games?" They said, "You mean PS2, right?" "No, I mean GameCube," and then go, "Oh, they're over there." They were dismissive. Rightfully so. Because they were going to sell 100 PS2 games a day, 5 or 6 GameCube games a day, if they were having a good day. They didn't want to sell GameCube, but they had to. But we all know the GameCube didn't play DVDs. We know this. But did the PS2 being a DVD player make that big of a difference in the long run? I'm going to meet in the middle. And I'm going to say yes and no. Yes, having a DVD drive in the PS2 made a big-ass difference. But not because it could play DVD movies. It made a difference because with the 4.7 gigabyte to 8.5 gigabyte discs opening up the worlds on the PS2, you could make big open-world games for the first time in gaming history. You could do pseudo open-world games on a small scale on the PS1, the Dreamcast, and the Nintendo 64. On a smaller scale. You could really open it up to games like God of War and Grand Theft Auto Vice City and so many others on the PS2 you couldn't do previously. So having that storage medium was a big deal. A very big deal for the PS2. Now, the fact that the Xbox also had a DVD drive and could also, with modifications, people forget this, it couldn't do it out of the box, play DVD movies, the PS2 could. You could still get that storage space on the Xbox. Plus, the Xbox had a more powerful CPU, a more powerful GPU, more RAM, and a built-in hard drive. So you had even more options for big open-world games on the Xbox than what you could do on the PS2. So you could make a big open-world blockbuster AAA game for the PS2 and very easily port it to the Xbox and make slight enhancements to the Xbox version. And people would buy the Xbox for that game. You could go the other direction with this too and make your game for the Xbox. Well, make it for the PC and then by extension make it compatible with the Xbox. And then port it to the PS2 if you wanted to. No, not everybody did this, but it also did get done. However, you really couldn't do this with the GameCube, which we've already talked about, because it only had 1.5 gigabyte discs, which meant you had to make sacrifices to put games on the GameCube. Now, there are a lot of reasons why the GameCube itself didn't catch on with the gaming public. And there are a lot of reasons why the Xbox itself didn't catch on with the gaming public. But if you look at the previous generations, combined sales, SNES and Genesis, you're just shy of 100 million. Combined sales. Saturn, N64, and PlayStation, combined sales, you're about 130 to 140 million. Combined sales. Combined sales. Throw in the extra 10 million for the Dreamcast while you're at it. The PlayStation 2 sold between 150 to 160 million units by itself. By itself. At a time when the Dreamcast could barely hit 10 million, the GameCube and Xbox tapped out of under 30 million. So, just the fact that the PS2 could do things the other two couldn't do, or at least the GameCube couldn't do, is not enough of a reason for why it was a big hit. Because if it just been that, right? It was just the next-gen system everybody wanted. Just looking at the combined sales of where we had been as a society worldwide as gamers, the PS2 should have sold, well, the PS1 sold about 101 million. The PS2 should have sold 125, maybe 130 million. Not 155 to 160 million. Where'd it get that other 30 to 40 million sales? Well, the PS2 had a couple of things going for it. One, it was the first true next-gen game console. I'm going to call the Dreamcast a half-step. It's like a Nintendo 64 with a slightly better GPU and a CD-ROM. It's what the N64 should have been at launch, is all it is. But it is technically, on the timeline, the beginning of that console generation. The Dreamcast kind of set the expectation. It set the bar. This is the bar. PS2, Xbox, and GameCube leapt over the bar and ran up the street, down the road, went around the corner and just kept running. The Dreamcast passed out drunk on the side of the road and was like, I give up. You guys finish the race. I'm just going to take a nap. So PS2 raised the bar. GameCube and Xbox did as well. But, so you had roughly 100 million, give or take, PlayStation users that were excited to get into the PS2. And because the PS2 was relatively inexpensive, it was about $300 at launch, which is about what the PlayStation 1 was. A little bit more than the GameCube, a little bit less than the Xbox, but affordable. Mass market affordable. And so because you had the built-in PlayStation 1 audience coming to the game console, you already had those sales. Those sales were locked in. And the fact that it was next-gen and it was doing things that you hadn't seen before. Again, because it had the DVD-ROM and it had more power, more horsepower than the Dreamcast. It could even do things the Dreamcast couldn't do. So, gamers were hyped for the PS2 going in. There was anticipation for it. That had nothing to do with the DVD-ROM, other than, like I said, the promise that games could get bigger and better. At launch, the games all came out on CD-ROM. They weren't using DVDs yet, because they didn't need to. We hadn't got there yet. There was no need for it. But, it could play PlayStation 1 games at launch, and PlayStation 2 games at launch, and DVD movies at launch. So, in 2000, 2001, 2002, if you were in the market for a next-gen game console, you had to choose, were you going to buy the discontinued, outdated Dreamcast and its inferior games and its limited catalog? Were you going to buy the still current-gen, but technologically inferior, and we'll just say inferior software library, Nintendo GameCube? Or were you going to buy the more expensive, more powerful Xbox with its pretty good games, but again, limited software library due to, slower third-party adoption? Or are you just going to jump into the PS2 because it had all the new next-gen games that were going to be on everything, and it could still play your PlayStation games that you've been enjoying for the last however many years? And, oh, by the way, it plays DVDs. Now you can watch, Star Wars and The Matrix and Back to the Future the way they were intended to be seen. you know, a little bit sharper, crystal clear image. Well, for the time. And you didn't have to be kind and rewind shit. So, that pretty much made it an easy sale. Right? $300, it's a DVD player at a time when standalone DVD players were about $300, give or take. And it could play PlayStation games, which at the time, PlayStation was about $150, give or take. And it could play next-gen games for $300, which the next-gen consoles were all roughly $300, give or take. So yeah, it was a good bargain. Easy sale. Now, if you weren't a PlayStation gamer, let's say you were a Dreamcast gamer, because you went from the Genesis to the Saturn to the Dreamcast, and you saw the writing on you accepted reality. The Dreamcast wasn't getting any more games, but you weren't done as a gamer. You had to choose. You were going to trade your Dreamcast into GameStop. You had to choose which of the three were you going to get. The GameCube had Sonic and Mario and all the games that some of the games you wanted. The PS2 had all the, the next-gen games everybody wanted, but it also had Shinobi and, a few other Sega exclusives. The Xbox had Halo and some PC ports that were pretty heavy hitters. And then it had, like, Sega Rally GT and a few other racing games and, a Toe Jam and Earl and a Panzer Dragoon game. So if you were a Sega fan, you had to decide which of the three consoles to buy, or do you got to bite the bullet and buy all three? There's not a lot of Sega gamers to go around. There's just not. At their peak, Sega topped out just around 30 million total worldwide users. At their peak. They didn't hit those numbers with the Saturn and the Dreamcast, so let's just use 10 million as the base. You have a base of 10 million Sega gamers. Let's say the base PlayStation 2 is going to sell 20 million units because it plays PlayStation 1 games and it plays next-gen games, PS2 games. And the GameCube is going to sell 20 million units because it's a Nintendo system. And the Xbox is somehow going to sell 20 million units because Microsoft's got more money than God and they can buy sales. Alright, so there's the base number is going to be 20 million. So now you got 10 million Sega gamers. Where do they go? You got to cut them into thirds, right? So about, 4.5 million per 4 million per system? No, it's not even. That's like 3.5 million. 3.5 million go to the PS2, 3.5 million to the GameCube, 3.5 million to the Xbox, give or take. Plus or minus 3 million, because some of them probably went to the PC. So we'll say 2.5 million each. That doesn't move the needle for anybody. So having Sega games on the PS2 didn't push it over the top. That wasn't it. Now, PS2 certainly had heavy hitters. It had some major AAA blockbuster titles, which definitely moved the needle. It had some must-have system sellers. Final Fantasy X, Grand Theft Auto 3 and Vice City. It had, what are some other big ones? Eventually God of War, Ratchet and Clank, Jak and Dexter. It had some heavy hitters. It had some system sellers, and it had the games everybody else had. It had all the games. If a game was made, it was on PS2. It just was. Unless it was exclusive to the other two. So, now you have the gamers who don't have loyalty to one console or the next, who are going to go where the games are. Well, the games are on the PS2. That's where they went. Now, we're going to say your core gamer market is about 40 million. Your base gamer market. So you got 20 million coming over from the PS2, an extra 2 to 3 million coming from the Dreamcast, and now you got that other 40 million. They're basically all going to go to PS2. We'll give 5 million to the Xbox. We're not giving any of them to the GameCube because the GameCube wasn't a legit next-gen contender. None of the people who were in the market for a proper next-gen game console bought the GameCube. It was Nintendo gamers only, pretty much, more or less. So, that gets them up to about 60 to 70 million, plus or minus. That's pretty good. It's not bad. That's pretty standard, you know. The PS2 was on sale from the year 2000 until 2013. That's 13 years on the market. Now, the bulk of its sales were in the first 6 or 7 years. We know this. The last few years, it was just sort of fizzling out, but it was still doing well enough to stay on the market. Kept getting redesigns to make it inexpensive so they could keep selling it at a fair price and still be profitable. And it was still getting games all the way up to about 2011. You know, 12 and 13, it didn't really get that much in the way of games. But it was still getting, partially it was still getting games because of the Wii. Nintendo had a product on the market that was technologically comparable to the PS2. Well, if we're going to make a game for the Wii anyways, we might as well make a PS2 port. And that is how the Wii was able to get so many of the games it did, because it went the other direction too. Well, people are still buying the PS2. We're just going to go ahead and make the game for the PS2, and then we'll use that version as the basis of our Wii port. Because they were at that, and it was cheaper. You could make games for the PS2 for less money than the PS3, PS4, Xbox 360, and Xbox One eventually. So yeah, they were going to keep making games for it. In addition to the core gamers, you've got another 15 to 20 million casual gamers. These are the gamers that will buy the game console when it comes down to their price point, $150 or less. They want your standard games. You know, they want a John Madden. They want your sports games. They want your racing games. They might pick up a Call of Duty or something like that. They might pick up some puzzle games, Tetris or whatever. But they're not your core market, but they're still going to buy the system, which is going to add to the sales numbers of the hardware. And they're still going to buy some games. So you have the casuals. The Xbox had nothing for the casuals. It was not a casual system. It was a hardcore gamers only. Casuals need not apply. The Nintendo, well, Nintendo is the definition of casual. Nintendo owns the casual market. That's always been their market. That's their bread and butter. So, we'll give, what did I say? We'll say 15 million. We're going to cut that in half. We'll give half to PlayStation and half to GameCube. Well, that's as far as Nintendo can go. That's about 26, 27 million, which is more than they actually did. So I'm being generous with my numbers here. So let's put another 15 million on top of the PS2. We were at what, 70 million? So that gets us up to about 85 million. I'll throw another 5 million on there for the dude bros who only play sports games. But they're still going to buy the PS2 because it was the IT system. So now we're up to what, 90 million? That's about what a game console can do. PS3 got just shy of 90 million. PlayStation 1 did just over 90 million. Just barely above 100 million. 101, I believe. Which is where the Wii tapped out. So that's your game. That's your, by and large, that's your gamers. That's your gaming market. But we're still 70 million away from endgame. Where'd that other 70 million hardware units come from? We know the market didn't grow. We know this because we know the worldwide total of the PS3, Xbox 360, Wii generation. We know the worldwide total of the Wii U, PS4, Xbox One generation. And we know the worldwide total where we're at now. The gamer market didn't grow that much. It's still about 150 million, give or take, worldwide. Give or take. Well, we got 90 million on PS2. Let's throw 24 million for the GameCube. So that's 115 million, 105 million. And then another 25 million for the Xbox. So that gets us up to about 130, give or take, plus or minus 5 million. That's your market. That's the gamer market. But we're still 70 million away. Where'd those other 70 million come from? DVDs. You bet your ass they did. Because in 2000, let's say you were wealthy and you bought a high-definition flat-screen TV in 97, 98. You had nothing to use it. You had like a handful of sporadic high-definition broadcasts that you could pick up over the air if you had an ATSC tuner and you had an antenna and you lived in a sizable market. That was it. That was the best you were going to get out of your giant screen, flat screen TV. You wanted something to get the most out of your TV. You wanted a DVD player. Now, it wasn't high definition, but it was ED TV. It was extended definition. Standard definition was 320 by 240. This was at least 640 by 480, so it was double the resolution. And it was digital versus analog, which meant it was going to look better on your digital TV than an analog source would have. And it was progressive scan, which was something that would look better on your progressive scan TV than an interlace source would. And it was anamorphic widescreen, which meant you could fill the screen properly without having to stretch the picture. So it at least looked better on your TV than VHS did, or even Laserdisc, which was the standard for high-end television at the time. So if you were a videophile, you wanted a DVD player. Now in 2000, you could go out and spend between $250 to $400 on a base DVD unit that just played movies, and that was it. Maybe it had progressive scan, maybe it had component cables. You were probably happy with that. But that was it. It could do nothing else. It could just play DVDs. Now, we're going to say you're not a gamer. We're just going to say you're flat out not a gamer, but you know about this PS2 device. To you, it's not a game system. It's a high-end electronic media player. To you, you now have a reason to buy a PlayStation 2. Because you want to get the most out of that digital flat screen TV that you just paid $6,000 for. Now, you don't care that much about price, but hey, for $300, I can get a pretty solid progressive scan anamorphic DVD player that can also play video games. Might as well buy the system and pick up some games. Maybe try Grand Theft Auto. Maybe try True Crime or Mafia. Or you'll find something to play. You'll find something to play because you spent the money. If 3DO and Neo Geo have taught us anything, rich people will buy a game system just for the clout. So they'll buy. They don't care about the games. They'll just buy it anyways. Now, I'm not going to give you 70 million rich people buying PlayStation 2s. That's unrealistic. At most, I can give you 5 million. So that gets you up to 95 million. That's an additional 5 million that weren't going to buy your system. And I'm being generous because some of those rich people probably also bought an Xbox because it was the high-end electronic device that could play DVDs. Whereas the PS2 was basically the budget device. Then you got middle-class families. These are mom and mom, dad and dad, whatever. 2.5 kids, dog in the yard, cat on the couch, bird in the library, minivan in the backyard. Alright. They've got a little bit more money than most, but they're still budget-minded. You know. They know they want to get a game system for their kids, right? Now, they may or may not be in the market for a game console. They're probably just happy playing PC games, right? They'll buy a PC that can play video games for the family because that's what you do. A lot of these middle-class people bought PCs and played games on them. This is where PC gaming came from, the middle-class market. But you're also in the market for a nice big, 32-inch flat screen TV. Maybe not high definition, but a nice ED digital TV or something until you can afford an HD TV. You want something so you can feel like you're, pretend you're rich because you're middle class. You can afford it. Again, you're in the market for a DVD player. Now, you've already got the PC in the game room, we'll say, the study or wherever you keep your PC that the kids are going to fight over to play games on. But you're like, hey, why not get a system for the living room? Well, you're not in the gaming market. And we're talking about the middle class people who aren't in the gaming market. Because yes, obviously some of them are included in that 90 million I've already previously mentioned. But here's a DVD player that can also play video games. It can play current gen PS2 games, which are comparable to the games you're going to be buying on PC anyways, and budget PlayStation 1 games, which are still good enough. Remember, PlayStation 1 was still kind of good enough in 2001. They were still making PS1 games until 2003. Maybe even as late as 2004, if I'm not mistaken. So, let's say here's another, I'll be conservative, 20 million. So we were at 95 million. We're going to throw 20 million on top of that. That's going to get us to, 115 million. That puts us over the edge. That puts us above and beyond the standard gaming market. Now, because the system is selling well and it's growing beyond the standard gaming market, a lot of these people, because they invested in the machine, they're gonna use it as a DVD player. To them, this is a DVD player. But they're also going to use it as a game player, or at least as a secondary game option, because they have it. So they're going to get games for it. Maybe some racing games. Maybe some Madden. Maybe a puzzle game. Maybe a Pac-Man World or something like that. Maybe a Ratchet and Clank or something like that. Maybe Katamari Damacy. Games like that. The more casual games that did sell really well on the PS2. And maybe the adults or the older teenagers pick up a Grand Theft Auto or a Mafia or something like that along the way just because, hey, I just play it on the PS2 when little brother's playing, whatever he's playing, The Sims or whatever in the room on the PC. This did push it over. Having a DVD player did push it over. And a DVD player that could play movies. That only gets us 115 million. We're still another 40 million or so, plus or minus 40 to 50 million shy of where we need to be, right? We're still another 40 to 50 million shy of where we got. Where'd they come from? When I have the lower income people, you've got the budget-minded people. They don't usually buy next-gen video games. They're not in the next-gen gaming market. Your budget people are buying a Nintendo 64 in 2002 when it is finally affordable to them. They're not in the market for PS2. They're not in the market for GameCube. Yet. But PS2 sells so well up front, it's front-loaded, and it has legs, that it keeps selling into 2003, 2004, and then we hit 2005. It's still selling really well, coming down in price. Here comes the next gen, the Xbox. Now, there's enough games on the PS2 library, plus the budget PS1 titles. There's enough budget PS2 games. These people can afford a PS2 now. A brand new one from Walmart. They don't have to buy a used one from the pawn shop. They can actually go in to Walmart at Christmas or Black Friday and buy a brand new in-the-box PS2 and afford the games. Because the system had legs. And now we get a big bump. These are your last-gen gamers who normally don't buy in until the system's used. So they don't count in the hardware sales, but now we get to count them. I would estimate there's probably another 25 million of them who are, Johnny-come-latelys. People who buy the next gen console when it becomes last gen because that's when they can afford it. They're always a generation behind. These are also your latecomers. These are the ones that buy a game console the last year it's on sale. Well, but they're doing it in 2004, 2005, which should have been the last year the PS2 was on sale, because it came out in 2000, but it did well enough it kept going. So we're going to keep bringing these people in year after year. But there's only about 25 million of them. So 115 plus 25, that gets us to 120, 30, 40. That gets us to 140 million. That's still 10 to 20 million, 10 to 20 million shy of the 150 to 160 million, depending on your source. So that's another 20 million to go. Well, just like you have the people that don't buy a game console until it's affordable, they also don't buy a DVD player until it's affordable, or a Blu-ray player, or even a VCR. My family got a VCR in 1989. They were invented in the mid-70s. They didn't become affordable until the late 80s, when they really took off. That's when we got our first VCR. And I had a lot of friends who didn't get their VCR until around that time as well. They were still making VCRs for a very long time. They were still making DVD players, and DVD players were coming down in price from 2000 to 2010, eventually being supplanted more or less by digital boxes and Blu-ray players. But those people still want a DVD player too. Well, now you've got a $99, $150 PS2 that can also play DVDs. Maybe they weren't really in the market for a game player, but they were in the market for a DVD player, but they couldn't afford a standalone one. They did buy a PS2 because it was a budget DVD player. And they bought it sooner than they would have bought a standalone DVD player because the PS2 was a budget player that could also happen to play PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 games, so it was a bargain. Well, yeah, we'll spend $200 bucks on the machine. We'll get some DVDs. We'll rent them from Blockbuster. We don't have to buy DVDs. We can rent them from Blockbuster. And then we'll pick up a couple of PS2 games, and we'll get some budget used PS1 titles from the pawn shop. Whatever. That's where the remaining 10 to 20 million comes from. Again, they would have been incentivized by the fact that it was a budget DVD player. So, we got at least 50 million of our sales on the PS2 from DVD players, from DVD consumers who bought it primarily as a DVD player, but also because it happened to be a bargain DVD player, because it was a budget player at the time that could do more than just play DVDs. Was having a DVD player the reason why PS2 took off and became ubiquitous with video games? Yes and no. Yes, it's the reason why... No, it's not the reason why it became the standard in gaming, because PlayStation was the standard in gaming the generation before, and it didn't play DVDs. But yes, it's the reason it went beyond the gaming market and shot up to the 150 to 160 million total sales it got at the end of its life, because it was so front-loaded with those DVD sales. Now, later in life, 2003 on, people were not buying the PS2 to be a DVD player. They were buying it for the games. But because it was front-loaded, you got the vast majority of the people who would not been in the market to buy a PS2 buying it early on. That pushed it over the edge. That is what propelled it into the stratosphere. Was the PS2 going to be a success regardless of the DVD capabilities? Yes. Because it was PlayStation 2. Now, PS3, PS4, PS5, they've all done relatively well. PS3 struggled initially, but ultimately it did about 88 million, plus or minus 3 to 5 million, which is about the market, 90 million, give or take. That's about what you would expect from a PlayStation game console. PS4 is sitting right shy of 130 million, and PS5 will get there in due time. So, they did eventually grow the market, and the market did eventually grow. beyond them. Even the Switch has proven this with its roughly 130 million. The Switch doesn't play DVDs, but it doesn't have to, because it does play Netflix and Hulu and Disney Plus and everything else. So it is a budget media player for some families. And it's basically a gaming tablet that you can use as a proper tablet, or at least an entertainment tablet to watch YouTube and Netflix on. So yes, I would argue that having multimedia capabilities was what pushed PS2 into the stratosphere. It would have still sold 90 to 100 million on its own without the DVD capabilities. But the other 70 million comes from the DVD sales. Abso-fucking-lutely. This is not debatable. This is unavoidable. This is a fact. I have friends who told me at the time they were buying a PS2 because it played DVDs. I knew people who weren't gamers who bought a PS2 because it played DVDs. Between 2000 to 2003. Once 2003 on, yeah, that wasn't happening anymore because you could get better DVD players for less money. And starting in 2006 on, you could get a Blu-ray player that could also play DVDs. So by that time, it didn't matter. But the first at least 3 years of its existence on the market, it abso-fucking-lutely made a difference. Now you're going to come at me with, but the Xbox. Yes, here's the thing. One, the Xbox was a premium product. When the PlayStation 2 launched, it launched at $300. The Xbox was about $350 base, so it was already $50 more. The Xbox controller was also more expensive, and the Xbox memory card was more expensive than the PS2. The PS2 had value added because it could play PlayStation 1 games. The Xbox could not do that. So it made the PS2 as a DVD player more lucrative because it doubled as a PS1 and a PS2 game player. The Xbox doubled as a next-gen game console and a DVD player, but the DVD player functionality was not standard out the box. You had to buy an optional piece of equipment, in this case the remote control, that turned it into a DVD player. And that was like a $40 remote control. So you're already paying $50 more for the machine, plus $30 for the memory card, plus another $40 for the remote to turn it into a You're back up to $500 at this point, once you buy a game and a DVD. The PS2 is still the better sale, the better bargain. Having the DVD player in the PS2 wouldn't have meant shit if the PS2 was a $400 game console at launch. It wouldn't have moved the needle at all. No one would have cared because it wouldn't have been a budget DVD product. But because it was $300 for a DVD player that could also play last-gen budget games and next-gen, current-gen games, that made it viable. That made it value-added. There was no value added to the Xbox because it wasn't a value. It was extra cost on top of everything else. And because it could only play Xbox games, which was a fairly limited software library compared to the PS2, it was a much, much harder sale. The people who bought the Xbox did not buy it because it could play DVDs. They bought it because it could play Halo and Fable. That's why they bought the Xbox. There were people who bought a PS2 because it was a DVD player. Those people weren't in the market for the Xbox because the Xbox was not a bargain for those people. The PS2 was. I would say the DVD player functionality built in at an affordable price with backwards compatibility and Sony's commitment to their third-party partners all contributed to its success. The PS2 was going to be a success regardless if it played DVDs or not. Having DVDs just pushed it over. It took it from a 90 to 110 million units up into the 150 to 160 million units we got. It just almost doubled the number of people who bought a PS2. Yes, it was absolutely a factor. It 100% was. And if you don't think it was, you're an idiot because you weren't alive then and you didn't have friends who bought it because it was a PS2 like I did. And listen, I was a popular person in high school. I was student council president. I was a journalist for 7 years. I was out there in the world, the know. You know, I mingled with a lot of people. And I also talked to people online. So yeah, maybe not everybody's circumstances is going to be the same. Everybody's got their own anecdotal evidence. They've all got their own stories. But there is sufficient evidence that suggests, yes, a significant portion of people who bought a PS2 did so because it was a DVD player. The ability to play games was just icing on the cake. It was just extra to them. A lot of those people were happy with PlayStation 1 because that's what they had. They bought the PS2 because they could keep their PlayStation 1 games. And then when they came down in price, they could buy the budget PS2 titles, which they did. And we saw evidence of this in the software sales year after year after year. Which is why they kept re-releasing games under their budget line. PlayStation's greatest hits. And they kept doing well. Because there were so many people that bought a PS2. Are there people who bought a PS2 who didn't give two fucks that it played DVDs? Absolutely. 100%. Either they already had a DVD player, or they just didn't care. They bought it for the games. They didn't need to watch movies on their PS2. And yes, there are people who knew it could play DVDs who still didn't watch movies on it because to them it was a game player. They didn't want to wear it out watching movies on it. I knew those people as well. Not just online, but in person, friends. So yeah, I would say, without a doubt, the PS2 would have been successful without the DVD player, but it wouldn't have been as successful as it ultimately became without the DVD player. That's my case.